Hey, behaviors. Producer Levi here. Just wanted to drop in a quick note before the show. Heads up, later in the show, you will hear Alfonso and Trina talking about people with uteruses and not just saying women. That is on purpose because lots of trans people have uteruses. Just wanted to make sure that was clear. Hope you enjoy and get something out of the show. Here we go.
I'm Alfonso Winker.
And I'm Trina Olson. And together, we're the co-founders of Team Dynamics.
And this is Behave.
Welcome back. We are so glad that you are with us and have tuned in for what we think is going to be the beginning of an election series of sorts. Right, Alfonso?
Yeah, we've got a lot to say. We have big opinions. You know, we are people who have had jobs in social justice movements. And so what we're attempting to do is take our years of learning in movement work and apply it to the experience of workers right now in this election cycle.
Absolutely. And part of what we talk about at Team Dynamics very consistently, right, is that our bodies have been politicized. They are not inherently political. And by that, I mean, we know workers in the US are experiencing their experience distinctly because of the bodies they're in, meaning the race they're viewed as, the religion they're practicing, the gender identity and presentation that they are showing up in the workplace communicating, right? And so this idea that identity always matters, whether we're talking about it or not. And I want to read, Alfonso, just a quick list that I threw together. I am certain it is not complete because I know how internet algorithms work and my world gets like parroted back to me through
Sure.
my Instagram and my internet and my Google searches, right?
Yeah, they know what you care about.
They also seem to be like listening and really selling me stuff I absolutely want in my home, which is, we'll talk about that a different day. So my quick list or things in my awareness about how this current election cycle has a daily impact on workers includes women, Black, Indigenous, people of color, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer people, working class folks, immigrants, Jewish folks, folks who practice Islam, and specifically people from China or who are ethnically Chinese, or even in a stranger universe, folks who are read as ethnically Chinese when in fact they are Asian Pacific Islander or of a different race or ethnicity. All of those folks, and I'm in some of those categories, so us folks, are being talked about and politicized in this election. Your workers know this, they feel this, and they're impacted by it. So over the course of your career, Alfonso, because for me, right, I was born in 1980, and this is my seventh president. My mom is very clear that I was born after Reagan was elected, but Carter was still president, which is an interesting period of time for my mother to be.
What a time to be alive.
I mean, my mom really got to experience a part of the news staying home with me for the first year because she had the privilege to do that. And it was a wild ride, or so I hear. But this is my seventh president. I have been in the workforce for 25 years this year. And so there's a lot of specificity about this election cycle and its impact on American workers. But I'm curious for you, over the course of your working life as a gay man of color, you're a lot more than that. And those are three of the things I think about when I think about how you've experienced your experience. How have you noticed how our identities and how our identities get conflated with our intellectual ability, why we are or aren't valued in our economy, what kind of jobs we can and can't have access to? How have you noticed being in sort of the middle of a hot election cycle impact workers around you?
Yeah, I just as you read the list, it's just so intense because I look at it and I think that's a lot of everybody. It's not everybody, but it's a lot of everybody. And if we aren't on that list somewhere, for you listening, someone you care about's on that list.
For sure. Yeah.
So it's holding the gravity that I think it can be easy at work to get focused in well, let's be polite and not pit Republican and Democrat workers against each other.
Mm.
And I think what's happening, the experience I've had in workplaces is when we weren't talking about just the truth, the nonpartisan truth of that our bodies are being talked about and our lived experiences are being talked about, is then I get re-politicized as a queer person. I get re-politicized as a person of color, and politicized negatively, meaning it has been my experience in nonpartisan, in workplaces that are attempting to be nonpartisan, that if I talk about how it was challenging to hear a comment about Mexicans being rapists and murderers and job stealers, that then I am somehow being inappropriate at work because people who have names like mine were called rapists and murderers and job stealers by a presidential candidate. I wasn't asking anybody to vote a certain way. I wasn't telling them that their party affiliation was right or wrong. I was saying it is hard to watch the news every day. And I'm a third generation Mexican American who is a US born US citizen. So I don't have a lot of fear around if I'm going to get to keep my job or keep my home or stay where I want to stay. And my connection to that community makes me feel like people like me, people who I'm linked to in struggle, are being talked about as subhuman and in a way that is on purpose, a way that is knowing people sat in a room and thought, if we tell lies about this whole group, this whole community, some voters are more likely to vote. So I have to sit at work the day after hearing that for the first time on the news and think, I wonder if I'm allowed to just name the truth of my pain and not get politicized as trying to do something to people, trying to convince them about something.
Right. I feel like part of what I'm hearing, and we're inviting leaders and workers who are listening to this podcast to do more truth telling more often. And that doesn't mean your job is to do voter persuasion in your Zoom breakout room. It doesn't mean that you cannot work next to, near, or at the same organization with people who vote differently than you. But it is, I'm thinking about the conversation being had nationally about just acknowledging the horror of the murder of Black people at the hands of police. The number of workers we've talked to where they say nobody said anything the next day. Right. And for folks who are in Black bodies saying, so that makes me feel gaslit. That makes me feel crazy because this incredible act of violence happened to someone who looks exactly like me. Now I'm afraid in a very visceral way that nobody thinks that's a big deal.
Right. The gaslighting of it all makes me think it's the trickery or the insidiousness of making people's experience of marginalization seem like a confusing personal experience rather than an on-purpose structural and systemic experience.
Yeah. When we're thinking about sort of the denigration, dehumanization, and even violence impacting the health and well-being of people for whom their identities are being used to motivate voters, there is this sort of binary thinking that has never been true, that there's a separation between American workplaces and American politics, right? And because we currently happen to be in a capitalist economy that relies on commerce, that is thinking about profit, you and I have talked before in the podcast about how our deep desire was to lead this dream team. And because we lead a company in the United States of America, we also have to be all up in the insurance system, which is not an expertise you and I have. But because, in the US, we do not have universal health care, it's this, businesses are tapped into all sorts of parts of workers' lives that we may or may not have a desire to be a part of, but workers count on workplaces to do a lot of that safety net stuff and do a lot of that family and financial support stuff. And as we've been talking about who is feeling what kind of trauma and how odd it can be to remember that we are all living through an election cycle at the same time, but we are experiencing that experience very distinctly based on our perspective, our relationships, our lived experience around scarcity financially, around fear of access to quality, affordable medical care, around really living on the edge as a family and someone's ability to get daycare, somebody's ability to take care of aging parents, right? We know that folks are sort of heavy with the weight of all that is happening. And I think also there could be workplaces right now saying, well, we don't want to stress our employees out more by doing something like wade into politics. And I'll just name, in my lived experience, I have never in my life done paid work for a candidate. That's not what I've been called to do. I've worked on issues that I care about my entire life. And so as we think about this sort of hiding behind partisan or political rhetoric as a way to tap out and say hands off.
Right.
Right. We've said before, if right now you are a workplace that says somewhere on your website, in your communications materials, when you are in the media, when you are talking to your clients, your customers about your products, your service offerings, if you are a workplace that says you value diversity, equity, inclusion, racial justice, or some derivation thereof, you have a responsibility this election cycle to practice what you preach, or you will lose the trust of the people who work for you.
Right. It's like the irresponsibility of proclaiming you want to create an environment where people do well and then pretending like you aren't interdependent with other systems.
Yeah.
Like we could pretend like, well, we don't endorse candidates or we're a nonpartisan company, so we're not affected by the election cycle.
Right. You and I were doing some LGBT community organizing back sort of the same time, a decade-ish ago. And the research was coming out that when LGBT people are on the ballot or being used to motivate voters, the incidence of hate crimes against LGBT people goes up, right? And the amount of stress and a person's ability to concentrate when folks are thinking, whoa, I am part of a community, I am part of a family, that who I am and how I am is going to be deeply affected by the outcome of something that goes down in the next couple of days. And you and I also know there are so many workers who do not have access to voting. So the idea also that this can feel like it's happening to people, right? Whether it's because of former felony convictions, it's because they're in a mixed status immigration situation in their family, or currently with their own status. They might not be of the right age to be voting, even though they are a worker, right? I was working at 15 and I couldn't vote till 18. So let's go to a break and then come back and talk some more.
Welcome back. Generally, by this point in the episode, when we are fired up about something, you are thinking, okay, but how? I'm with you, Trina. I'm with you, Alfonso. But how would we do this? And I want to go back to something, a framework that we have been using with our team, with our clients, with communities that we care about since the murder of George Floyd earlier this summer. We've been asking folks to tell the truth, create space to experience the truth, and then take action. So you might hear that word and think that we are about to tell you to do something partisan. We're not, so stay with me. I'm not asking you to endorse a candidate or start doing lobbying work that you're not registered to do as a company. What we are inviting you to do, like Trina said, if you have ever said you want all kinds of people to feel welcomed, included, like they matter, like they can thrive in your environment, like they can bring whatever aspects of themselves to work that you want them to bring, then first begin by telling the truth. So do not allow major moments to happen in our communities without acknowledging that they happened. Meaning, and I was just saying to Trina, we haven't said anything yet in our company about the fact that Ruth Bader Ginsburg passed away over the weekend. A bunch of folks who have uteruses and care about people who have uteruses in the United States of America woke up wondering if rights and access that have been provided for 40 plus years would still be there with the appointment of a new Supreme Court justice. Folks worried if there was going to be a judicial stopgap for the terrorizing of people's reproductive systems and all of the other rights that Justice Ginsburg fought for. We haven't said anything about that, so it's important for us to name the truth. We know this major event happened in our community, and we know for some of us, it makes us anxious, worried, scared, angry, activated in some way. So 2, take some space. That's the second part. So first is truth. We know this happened. So acknowledge that something is happening. Acknowledge that in the current news cycle, XYZ is being discussed, and we know that it might land for certain groups of people in the following ways. Not asserting that it is or that it has to, but that it might be. And we know the truth of this moment is going to land different for different people. The second is space. So what kind of space can you offer? Whether it is flexibility of time, whether it is if you're an HR person who can just say, my Zoom room door is open from this hour to this hour. If you just want to talk about how activated you are, how this is impacting your work, or how you're wondering something. If you are doing something in a communications or marketing realm, is it your job as a company to say anything about that truth? And for what reason? What is the goal? And then action. How, as a result of knowing the truth about something happening in your community, creating the space, either individually or collectively, to name how it's feeling for you. How will you be different? What will you do? Is it that you want to double down on a particular policy or resource or benefit that you offer? Is it that you will create space for people to volunteer or get engaged when heightened moments in a community happen? But it begins by telling the truth, that you understand that you are not plugging your ears and closing your eyes and pretending like this current election cycle isn't happening, and that people you care about, workers in your company, are being targeted on purpose with hateful vitriolic. These are not differences of opinion. These are studied, calculated lies to scare other American workers into voting a particular way. To always begin with the truth, figure out what space you can take, and then ask, is there an action? And the action doesn't have to be related to a candidate. It can be related to things you're already doing that you want to do more of or do differently.
And thank you for bringing us back to this truth space action framework. It's really been a strong touchstone for you and I these last few months, because when we think, I don't know, should we or shouldn't we? Is this ours to touch or handle, given, who we are and where we sit and what our company's all about? But one of the things that I think has been really powerful about truth, space, and action is that woven throughout, rather than guessing what our colleagues need, we ask, right? As a leader, I could keep pretending I know because I get a sense about how I am impacted when I see a Black person murdered by police, about how I feel impacted when I hear about money towards a wall, as we think about sort of generalized xenophobic actions being taken. I think about how I feel as a person who does have a uterus when Justice Ginsburg's passing was announced. And rather than just project what I need or what would be valuable to me, we think again about how big is our menu? What's in our toolbox? I just want to name how powerful it is that you, as a male-bodied leader, are willing to talk about the impact on people with uteruses of Justice Ginsburg's passing. So it isn't just, oh, that impacted women, so a woman leader should probably say something. Or that impacted people of color, so a person of color should surely say something. There's often a lot of hot potato. Who is it about and whose job is it to say or do something? And I think that's why the telling the truth comes back to even, hey, this big thing happened. This impacted me this way. That's my truth. What's going on for you? And I think this idea of space can sometimes get conflated with, oh, so are you asking us to be our colleagues' therapists?
Oh,
What
yeah.
would you say to that, as you've talked about the different kind of spaces and space you've held for our different colleagues and in space with some of our colleagues over the past few months?
So let's say I'm offering space in the form of time with me. I can be clear about my boundaries about what the time is and isn't. And I can be clear about the things that I'm willing, able, and ready to talk about and listen to. And then I also can be clear that there are sort of edges where I might suggest that that is a conversation for someone from your faith group, a mental health practitioner, your chiropractor, your life coach, knowing where you can provide listening and support, and then where that stops and where you think other people are on the other side of it is super helpful. So I will often tell folks, I am happy to listen. If it sounds like part of what you're holding will create a condition where you are unsafe, I'm going to suggest that you seek out some additional resources. And I can suggest resources, but if you have access to additional resources already, then go work with those folks. So sometimes it's important for me as a manager to have some context for how someone is doing and then receive and believe that, but not be the one who fixes it.
Absolutely. I think that action piece too is fascinating because we have experienced so many folks spend day and night trying to figure out the perfect thing to say, right? Whether it's an internal email or it's something you're going to say at a staff meeting, or it's making some sort of announcement or proclamation publicly. How would you help leaders right now think about action as beyond but inclusive of saying one thing one time? How would you help people move to that action place when it can feel like, but if I don't get it exactly right, I probably shouldn't do it?
Right. I would say, that's a common thing. We've talked about that in some recent episodes about sort of being captured in the enormity of a problem or an opportunity. And I would think one is to pause and do some self-awareness and some goal work. No surprise, right? So what's coming up for me? Why is it that I want to say what I want to say? And where did I learn that? And from whom did I learn it? And does that reinforce any racist, sexist, homophobic, transphobic sentiments? So sort of test your own message with yourself and test it with trusted colleagues, right? What's coming up for me? Secondly, what is my goal behind wanting to do something? If it's to make myself more comfortable, I would suggest to move away from that goal. If it is to stop people from feeling the pain of being lied about in the news cycle, I would also say move away from that goal. But if the goal is something like acknowledge the reality, say how it feels for me, and then be open and curious about how it's landing for others, I think you're on the right path. So I would say, like we talk about this phrase from our friend Anil all the time, investigate your instincts. What's coming up for you and why, and what is it you're hoping to do? And then as you move forward with whatever that action is, be open to some of the workers you're in collaboration with, letting you know that the impact of that intent didn't match what you were hoping to do. And that doesn't mean the whole thing you did was wrong. It means it didn't work for that group of people or that person. So then you can ask, how might I shift or evolve next time? And it's making me think about one of the actions that we're taking at Team Dynamics when we think about the truth of how this election is feeling for our team. And the truth is, we have a fairly progressive left-leaning team. We are working hard to make sure that a more just, equitable, and democratic president, Senate, Congress, and everything down to school board and city mayor, city council reflects the values that we have as a company. We're not telling our staff how to vote, but what we are doing is Trina and I are giving to the point that it hurts. We're giving more than we ever have individually and collectively. And what we're doing is we're closing on election day and we're closing the day after. And Trina, will you talk about the specificity of both of those actions and why it isn't just symbolic, but there's sort of some tactical and strategic reasons why we're closing both those days?
Absolutely. Let's take a quick break so that folks can pull over, grab a pen or pencil, get ready to take some notes, because we'll do a lightning round about why we've decided to take those actions through that framework of truth, space, and action. We'll be right back. All right, as we are closing out today's episode around how this election and all elections impact American workers, we're going to talk about truth, space, and action and how that helped us decide what we are doing this year. So telling the truth. A couple things we know to be true about this election. We have never had a federal election where we are trying to figure out how to vote during a pandemic. So figuring out this massive vote by mail system, figuring out how to safely vote in person, given that the vast majority of precincts are staffed by volunteers who are often of the age that is sort of highest risk for COVID-19, right? So we've never voted like this in this way before. So that's one of the things that's true. One of the other things that's true is that there are public officials on record saying it will be better for them if less people vote, right? And they're not retracting those statements and they're not saying they didn't say them. We also know there is a long history from poll taxing to voter ID laws to gerrymandering of districts of it being more complicated and difficult to impossible for certain kinds of people to vote over others. So namely Black, Indigenous, people of color, and poor folks. So those things are just all true. And so another thing that's true is that in the United States currently, federal election day is not a federal holiday. So it's not a like banks closed, school closed day. The last piece of truth is that federal law says workplaces need to give up to 2 hours of time off for folks to go vote. Okay, so those are all the truths. Space. Then we thought about who's on our team and who is high risk for COVID. We know that by now. We know some about who does and doesn't have access to vote. We know some about who have caretaking responsibilities and really supporting both young people and elders to vote in a complicated way and in a new way. And we know of our folks' desire to be able to really engage. So action. We've decided it is squarely within the values of our company that folks are able to civically participate. So we want to create the maximum opportunity for us to all navigate an unprecedented day on November 3rd, right? Everybody's making really good plans. Folks are trying to vote by mail early who can, but it's complicated. And so we don't want our workplace to be the reason somebody had to get out of line and couldn't vote, or somebody couldn't support their elder to figure out how to vote from a care facility, or couldn't support an 18-year-old in their life that's going to vote for the first time, right? So our goal is to make voting as possible and accessible as it can be. And so for that reason, we have decided to close the office that day. We've also suggested to other folks that what you can choose to do is not have any meetings that day. So maybe folks are doing email, but again, this idea of sort of time-bound things just might be tricky when folks are trying to navigate a really complex day. Then a couple weeks ago, you and I on Slack started saying, wait a second. You know what's also true? We may or may not know who wins the election the night of.
Right. There's the voting, and then there's the feeling about how the vote did or didn't go.
Exactly. Well, just with this much vote by mail, and you and I both having lived through the 1999 presidential election, when there was a month wait to figure out if George W. Bush had won or Al Gore had won, right? It was too close to call. There was hanging chads. I still think it's just one of the funniest phrases to ever exist. But there's just multiple ways that election night could go down. Biden and Harris could be called the winners. Trump and Pence could be called the winners. We could be told we don't know yet. And so what we came to terms with was the fact that we bet it will be near impossible to concentrate the day after, no matter what. We're not sure how people will have slept, and we are crystal clear that at Team Dynamics, we want quality work, and we want to be giving quality support to our clients, not quantity. This is not about just clocking hours in front of your computer or your email. So because we've had this conversation now, weeks out, we can say, how can we move some things on the calendar around? How can we prepare to get the work done in a different way, or maybe having a couple long days before or after? And then I would say the other action we've taken is that we've preemptively scheduled a whole staff meeting the week after the election, with the entire purpose just being checking in and seeing how folks are going. So rather than saying, oh no, it's not on anybody's calendar, we don't have time, everybody's scheduled, we just said, we don't know what's going to happen, but whatever is going to happen will impact us all. So let's just be smart leaders, plan ahead, and put a calendar hold, right? So those are just some of the ways we're thinking about, okay, if we're just telling the whole truth in a row, if we are thinking about the kinds of ways that space can support our people, and for us, our work is our people. And so this is an investment in the health and well-being of our people. What are the actions we can take as leaders? That means, of course, we can still hit our benchmarks as a business, but we can be more flexible and creative than, oh, because it's not a federal holiday, I guess there's nothing we can do. Of course we can. We run the business.
A note as we sign off, we flagged this already for you. It is fully in our awareness that not all workers are voters and not all voters are workers. We're talking squarely at the intersection of people who are paid workers in the United States of America, who are eligible to work, who have jobs like we have, who are primarily working from home on Zoom, people who normally would have what we might call office kind of jobs. So that's who we're talking about today in this episode. Thank you so much for hanging out today. We always want to hear from you on Twitter at Behave Podcast. Tell us, how are you talking about the truth, making space and taking action around the exact context of this election cycle? Be sure to wash your hands, wear a mask, and make good choices. Levi, I think we need to just let Trina talk, and then I'll talk with her and see what comes.